What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the First Class Lacrosse Podcast. We have a great discussion on tap today. Huge weekend in college lacrosse with some upsets, overtime games, and conference battles. I'm joined by my co-hosts Stephen Rehfuss and Matt Dunn, and we have a special guest in Syracuse star defender Billy Dwan. Matt, I'm going to pass it off to you to introduce today's segments.
Thanks, Deemer. Today, we will kick it off with our 2-minute drill led by Stephen Rehfuss, covering some notable games and performances from this past weekend. Next, we'll get to our players' perspective, which, as you mentioned, is a special guest interview with Syracuse defender Billy Dwan. After that, we'll get to GPUs, games, players, and units. Then we'll get to trends. Last week, we talked about dodging angles and how offenses can set up their dodging angles to better attack defenses. This week, we're going to explore the 10-man ride a bit. And then we'll wrap it up looking ahead at some big games this upcoming weekend. So with that being said, Stephen, why don't you take us into the 2-minute drill?
Thanks, Matt. Fun weekend of college lacrosse. A lot of conference play started. We had BU beating Army 10-9. That's a big win for Boston. Richmond listening to Adam Lamberti with a 13-12 win over Georgetown. In the Ivy League, Princeton beating Harvard by 2, 13-11. Big Ten, Maryland falls in their first game of Maryland takes their first loss of the year. Michigan 11-10 over them in 3 overtimes. That's Michigan's 4th straight win versus Maryland. Continuing with the Ivy League in overtime, Dartmouth with a huge program win for Sean Kerwin, 9-8 over Penn. Denver with a big win over Duke, 13-6. Syracuse 16, Colgate 12. And then Sunday night, it's going to be our only Sunday night Big Ten game of the year. Ohio State took it to Penn State, 13-9. On the women's side, a top 4 matchup that ended up being pretty lopsided. Northwestern 16, Maryland 4. ACC matchup, BC over Stanford 17-9. And then 3 other games that stood out was Florida 16, Clemson 10, Michigan 11, USC 9. And then in the Ivy League, Brown with a huge win over Yale 14-11. Couple of notable performances. I feel like this list gets a little bit shorter each week. Have to shout out Will Barnes from Boston University, 22 saves versus Army. Caleb Fiak, I know we'll talk about him a little bit later, from Ohio State, 17 saves versus Penn State. The 2 Cornell attackmen, CJ Kirst, the headliner this week with 9 goals and 1 assist versus Yale. You can check out all of those points on our YouTube channel. His line mate, Ryan Goldstein from Cornell, 2 goals and 8 assists versus Yale. For Denver's big win over Duke, Noah Manning had 6 goals and 2 assists. Joey Spallina set a career high for himself in points with 5 goals and 6 assists versus Colgate. Watching some Michigan-Maryland film, a guy that really stood out was Ryan Cohen. He had 2-2 versus Maryland. And then on the women's side, from that BC-Stanford game, we had McKenna Davis with 1 goal and 7 assists in the road win.
Army dropping, Maryland dropping. The Fairfield Stags are the lone undefeated team left in men's Division I lacrosse. All right, well, hey, we got a special guest here, Billy Dwan, kind of sitting in the queue. Billy's got a full day in season. They got Virginia this weekend, got class coming up, then practice this afternoon. Billy was a 3rd-team All-American as sophomore year at Syracuse last year. He is a junior impact player, kind of running through his stats before this, just trying to get a feel for, we see a lot of highlights of Billy Dwan, but he had 8 goals as a sophomore defender at Syracuse, which I had 1 in my 4-year career at Maryland. So just looking at those stats, the shot clock maybe accounts for some of it, but very impressive seeing another defender do that. So far this year, Billy is, I believe, a captain at Syracuse as a junior and a huge impact player for that team and leader on it. So, Billy, we're thrilled to have you. Welcome to the pod.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
Yeah, welcome, Billy. It's been fun watching you play these last couple of years. One thing I feel like people don't know about you that we got firsthand experience of is, I have to say, you're probably one of the best 3x players that played against in my recent tenure these last couple of years. You tore it up at our holiday 3x tournament the last couple of years. You're pretty tough to score on in cage. Where did all that success come from?
Yeah, I mean, I think just playing in the backyard, I guess. Definitely fun playing against you guys too. But I think also too in high school a lot, just with COVID and kind of how all of that kind of shook out. I think a lot of us just played, it was fun to play outside, play 3x. It was only 6 guys, so it wasn't really an issue with, I guess, the school or anything like that. So I guess a lot of practice and going against great competition and everything like that, I guess made me a better player with the short stick. And obviously, goalie, I take up some size in the net. So I'd kind of just blame it on that and just, get hit by a lot of shots.
Bill, curious, because I feel like a lot of defenders started off playing like short stick through like middle school. Did you play like attack or midi growing up and get switched to defense at some point?
Yeah, so I was always kind of like a bigger kid, so I kind of always played midi. And then I played for like Lutherville Rec or whatever it was. And I think when I was like in like 4th or 5th grade, I don't think we had too many defensemen, and it was kind of like I was always pretty good at it. So they threw me back there, and my dad like chopped me down a long pole. It was probably like 4 feet tall, but I had that. And then in middle school at Loyola Blakefield, I played both attack and defense. So we had like we had like 8 defensemen, and obviously so we split time. So I played like 3 quarters on defense and 1 quarter on attack. So that's kind of my attack career summed up. Then I think I had 1 game at Loyola Blakefield my senior year. I've played man up some. So I guess that's kind of my attack career. But yeah, I started when I was like playing midi, and then I kind of just transitioned to defense probably early middle school.
You know, we've talked about before just the ability for like a young player to get to play multiple positions, and whether it's in 3-by, playing box, or just growing up playing attack, like the value of learning how to score goals as a middle schooler, having fun with a short stick, dodging, like for you, that translates in a very real way to how you play on the field.
Yeah, definitely. I try to just make it fun and create new things and try new stuff. But I think it definitely helped me. And then obviously just being in the backyard, just trying new things, I think also does too.
One question, Bill, obviously we've spoken about it before, but you mentioned your dad chopping you down a short stick. Your dad's a longtime college lacrosse coach at Hopkins for most of his career. And where was he before Hopkins?
So he was like in the business world for like right out of college, and he went to Loyola as like a grad assistant. He coached at Loyola for a couple years as like their volunteer coach, and then he was got a call from Coach Petro, who obviously I know well and he knows well, and he kind of offered him a job at Hopkins. So that's kind of how my dad got into the coaching world, and then he obviously did it for 20 years or so, and then he just recently got out of it, or 5 years ago he got out of it now. But yeah,
how do you feel like, because I know you mentioned growing up watching games with him, how do you feel like growing up with your dad being a college coach impacted, one, yourself as a player on the field, but 2, just your general like love and desire to be a college lacrosse player?
I think it definitely helped me on the field wise, just the IQ side of things and why people do the things they do. If it's like why offenses do certain sets or certain picks or certain actions on their offense. And I think I can, I guess, see it before others. I don't know if that's like the term you'd want to use, but I kind of think that's how I see it. And then obviously I think when you're watching like lacrosse on the couch as a little kid every day, or you're watching on the floor, watching film, breaking it down and doing that every day from the time you're a 5-year-old until you're a sophomore, you're in high school, I think that kind of helps you, I guess, grow the love for it. And I think that, you know, if you asked me if I wanted to be in the NFL or, you know, a college football quarterback or NBA, whatever it was, I'd rather be a college lacrosse player. So I kind of always say I'm living the dream, and that's kind of, you know, how I feel, and I just wouldn't, you know, be anywhere else in the world.
Yeah, Bill, I was going to, you know, kind of build off of that. One thing I'm curious about, I feel like I remember from, you know, days just playing, sometimes, you know, defenders, they know what they're, you know, scouting against in terms of they're trying to be in certain spots and cover different actions. But you really strike me as a guy that has a full understanding of all of lacrosse, you know, and you played offense as a younger player and so forth. So how has that helped you in your prep? You know, would you say that you're pretty in tune to what your offense is doing, you know, the goals, what they're focused on, what other offenses are doing? Or do you focus more just around like what you need to do as a defense to stop? You know, you just strike me as a guy that has the full picture of what's going on the lacrosse field. Is that something that, you know, you feel strongly about? You feel like from your experience with your dad that's the case?
Yeah, I mean, I try to always have a full picture. I mean, I know all the like offensive sets and everything like that, or at least I try to. Kind of helps me in practice too when you're going against those guys if you know what they're running. But you know, I kind of always ask those guys too, if it's, you know, Owen or Joey or any of those guys, I'll kind of ask them like where they want me in transition or what they want out of me, if they want, you know, like if it's a bigger transition game or not. And then I've been taking some wings this year too, so I kind of talk to the faceoff guys. And obviously on the defensive things, I try and know everything. And, you know, I think it's like the Score Break app or whatever it is. And, you know, you could cut clips from certain players. I try and like watch all their players and try and watch all their sets and make sure I don't really miss anything. So when it comes game day, I feel like I'm more prepared than anybody out there.
Why don't you walk us through how Billy Dwan watches film, you know, for an upcoming game? it can be high level. You don't have to be specific to an opponent, obviously, but like, you have a process you follow or a way you usually go about watching that film?
Yeah, so I try and watch like film every day for, a couple hours sometimes in class, even though I probably shouldn't be. But on like Sundays, I'll kind of watch the game from the day before and kind of flush that. And then Mondays, I'll kind of just turn on a game from the opponent we're playing that week. So this week we have Virginia. So, like, I don't even know what today's Wednesday, but Monday, turn on one of their games, just watching it all the way through, kind of seeing their play style and their this and that. And then Tuesdays, I'll watch like big picture stuff. So all their sets, if it's, if the team runs big little a lot, or if they run inverts a lot, or if they run just, like 3 out, whatever it is, I'll watch all of that stuff. And then Wednesday and Thursday, I'll watch all the individual matchups. And then Friday, I'll watch, I'll watch a game through again. So like they're probably their most recent game. Maybe I'll watch a game earlier in the year. And just watch it all the way through, kind of see if I missed anything. And so then when Saturday comes around, I'm kind of feel fully prepared. And then obviously it kind of gets thrown off some with midweek games and try and cram most of it in, but that's kind of how it looks.
Yeah, Billy, you're a junior captain, you're an All-American. I want you to if you could, just kind of walk us through what your Syracuse career has looked like. Look at you now, you're a superstar. You didn't start every game as a freshman. You did get a lot of playing time, but if you could just walk us through, what the transition has been like for you as you've just gotten more comfortable within the program.
Yeah, I think my freshman year, I didn't start till probably around this time, or maybe a little bit earlier, due to injury and everything like that. But for me, I think I just going in trying to be a great teammate, and obviously nothing's given to you. So when that opportunity does come around, it's like a special opportunity, and not to take it for granted. So I just played man down my freshman year up until Hopkins. Ironically, that's where my dad used to coach. And the kid got hurt. I still talk to him, Landon Clary. He graduated last year, and he got hurt like 30 seconds in, if that, like literally first clear of the game. He tried to run it over and messed up his hamstring, I think it was. But so then I kind of went in that game. And then I played the rest of the season that season. Then the last couple of games, I got bumped up to LSM. And then my sophomore year last year, started the whole season, obviously this year and everything like that. But I think it's just cool because I've kind of, I guess as a captain, you kind of see it all. I've been on the bench, I've been on man down, I've been starting, I've been playing LSM. So I've kind of done everything. So obviously it's like perspective in that fact where I feel like I can relate to everybody if you're a freshman or you're how it is these days, like 6th year, 5th year. So I think I can connect with everybody. I think I can, be personable, and I'd say I'm a pretty positive person, and I try and, make everybody's day better, just, coming in contact with me. So that's kind of what I try and do as a captain. And then career wise, I think it's been positive so far. I'm not really wanting to talk about all that stuff, but I think it's been positive. Obviously bigger goals in mind than, score some cool goals and everything like that, but I'll do it if that's what the team needs. So for me, just trying to get better every day and trying to, win some games and have some fun.
At Syracuse as a captain and just being a player at Syracuse, as you know, right, you win a big game, suddenly you're the best team in the country. You lose a game by 1 or in overtime, and it's like, you're the worst team in the country. Nothing's going your way. And it feels like the world is ending there, right? So when you're a senior in high school, Syracuse has a losing season. Then you walk into the team in 2023. You guys start to improve each year, but you didn't make the tournament that year. Last year, you make the tournament. So, being a junior captain now and kind of in this position, how are you approaching, the remainder of the season and just, the growth that you've had personally, but also from a team perspective, in your last 3 to 4 years or so?
Yeah, obviously, I think we say it all the time, like Syracuse has a lot of pressure. I don't think there's anywhere with more pressure in the country. I think, but pressure is a privilege. That's what we always say. If why would you do it if no one cares about it? So obviously we had a couple losses earlier in the season. And I think, Stephen, I went to OIP the day after we lost to Harvard. And or 2 days or whatever it was, and some guy walked in. He's like, "Oh, you're on the lacrosse team," and he started talking about the loss and how we played terrible, this, that, the other. I kind of just laughed it off. But I think when I got in the car, I kind of realized how people care about what we do. I don't think I'd have it any other way. But yeah, I think that obviously we've been getting better every season. Our motto is just win today. So I have to go to class after this. I got to go watch film, go to practice, lift, treatment, all that stuff. So I got to, before we focus on winning national championships, I got to do all the right little things and just beat today. And obviously, if I can't, we can't beat Virginia on Saturday if we don't just win today. So that's kind of been the motto. We're just taking it day by day, trying to get better. Whatever it is, just get 1% better every day. So
Billy, shifting gears a little bit. You're a guy that's been very in tune with more so than most, I'd say, for now as a junior in college, but since you were in middle school, high school, kind of just the general trends of the game. We talked about your dad being a coach, you watching it, watching film and following it. How do you feel like the defensive position has evolved since you were, even in high school, maybe watching lacrosse younger to where you are today? Have you noticed anything change in what you kind of thought the defensive position was growing up into what you are working on and the skills you need in the offenses you're playing against now today?
Yeah, I think obviously everything evolves over time. I think, a lot of defensemen through the years, I think you see different, I think you see LSMs play more offensive these days. I think the shot clock has a big piece to do with that. I think, maybe back then, 10 years ago or so, like an LSM was just a really good cover guy. And obviously saying that those guys aren't good cover guys now. I think we have some great ones on our team, but I think that, those guys are more offensive, better off the ground, more athletic. Then obviously I think the whole transition game's kind of changed. And I think that's kind of evolved since the shot clock. Back then, I think if you play 3 minutes of defense, you're kind of pretty tired. So you get the ball out the offense and you're not really looking to push transition. Whereas now it's, back and forth, up and down. Obviously you see it in the PLL and all that. So I think that's kind of evolved. I don't think, other stuff's evolved too much. I think that every team has like off ball guys, cover guys, everything like that. But I think just defensemen and their stick skills have definitely evolved over the past, in the shot clock era.
Yeah, Billy, one thing I'm curious about building off of that, we had your former teammate AJ Larkin on here a couple weeks ago. We've had Sam King, and we asked them, some of the adjustments and changes from high school to college. And I think most people would say, the speed of the game, right? It's kind of, it's a lot faster than it was in high school. You played at a high level, but as you also, talk about this evolution of the defensive position, what's your take on some of the biggest adjustments, that you've seen or gone through from the high school level to the college level?
I mean, it's definitely faster. For me, it's how fast the ball moves rather than like how fast the players are. I think that's the MI has a lot to do with that. I think that prepared me for college really well. And you're obviously guarding great players on Tuesdays and Fridays. But for me, it's just how fast the ball is, I'd say. And then the other thing I'd say too is, for me at least, like in high school, I like to know where everybody was at all times. And I thought like being very organized and everything like that. And then obviously in college, like I'm just like in the deep end kind of treading water. So I'm like focusing on my guy. I couldn't tell you what else is going on with anybody else. I'm just trying to do my job. And then obviously over time, I think that's kind of slowed down for me. And I think it's, gotten to the level that was at in high school where I feel like the ball moves slower and everything like that. I think that just comes with time and experience. But yeah, I'd say how fast the ball moves, how skilled people are. Like if you think you're like, if someone's covered, they're probably not. They'll still throw it in there. It could still be in the back of the net. So I'd probably say how fast the ball moves, how skilled players are, and obviously how like faster the game is.
Yeah, I feel like you guys are a team too that your offense really displays that. I really enjoy watching your offense, so I can only imagine in practice what guys are pulling out, throwing around, experimenting with.
Yeah. Coach Gates' motto is like, if you can try it in practice, if you can do it in the game. So obviously you see some crazy stuff. If that's guys trying air gates, if it's I've seen like behind the back bounce passes. I've seen it all. So obviously a lot of fun. Sometimes you got to sit back and just say like, that was super cool, but definitely a pain to go against, frustrating sometimes going against those guys, and you're playing really good defense and the ball's still in the back of the net. So
Bill, one thing we wanted to ask, just, we saw the clip of you scoring at the 10-man ride this past week. We're seeing more teams get into the ride, and I think you've kind of seen certain teams do it historically that were, really good at 10-man. In 2016, when I was playing, Brown had a really good 10-man they ran. Well, Virginia's been a 10-man team. UNC went through a phase of 10-man, but now I think you're seeing more teams kind of get into the ride. Wondering from your guys' perspective, like, how often are you seeing teams 10-man, you guys? How often are you guys preparing for the 10-man? Like, is that a part of a regular week of practice, or even like an off-season thing you guys work on? Or is that like hey, this team 10-mans, that's weird, let's scout them? Just kind of curious how teams are viewing the 10-man nowadays, when what seems to be a season where more teams are implementing a pressure ride and either bringing the goalie out or at least kind of like jamming up the middle of the field.
For us, it's like a week-to-week thing. Obviously, we have like our base clear. I'm assuming like every team in the country does. And obviously, If a team throws like a weird ride at you, or if it's a 10-man, if it's something else, then we'll kind of adjust a little bit, make little tweaks to it. Colgate 10-man does this past weekend. I know Virginia does it some. We got it in a scrimmage from BU this past January. So obviously just doing little tweaks to it. And obviously we talk about it in practice labs. I think, obviously clearing is an important stat. And if you're clearing the ball successfully, that gets the ball to the offensive guys so they can put it in the back of the net. So, we kind of have little tweaks for it every week. But and then obviously I'd say that when you're trying to break it, I just say move the ball fast. And obviously worst case scenario, you kind of take a shot at the net. So for us, it's kind of just making little tweaks. And then from there, we'll go and, try and play with it.
Yeah, I've got one more question. Just, in terms of the Syracuse defense this year, I think obviously new goalie in net, but just wanted to, kind of hear your thoughts on, having you and Riley Figueres. I think it makes it really difficult for opposing defenses. And, I think you two can guard just about anyone, but also, you guys have different styles. So could you just talk about, him a little bit and what that looks like for you guys down there on defense?
I mean, he's one of my best friends. So playing with him, I played club with him. Starting my freshman year in high school, I want to say. So I've known him for a while, and obviously watching it from afar for a little bit in the club scene. Then obviously I think it was his junior year summer when he decommitted from Rutgers, I think, to come to Syracuse. So obviously I was pretty stoked about that. I've roomed with him here. So yeah, just obviously playing with him on the field, it's definitely easy. He's a guy kind of thing where you don't really have to talk to. You can just kind of know and trust that he's going to be in the right place, even though still talk to him. So yeah, obviously I think he takes a lot of pressure off my shoulders, kind of lets me kind of roam and do what I want in transition, just in the sense of he kind of takes the number one cover guy most of the time, unless it's like a bigger guy. For me, I think he makes my job 1,000 times easier, and just playing with him every day, and along with Michael Grace, they're two of my best friends. So it just kind of makes this probably the best part of my day, just playing with those guys, and so much fun, and I wouldn't change it for the world.
Well, Bill, best of luck this weekend against Virginia. The rest of the season, you guys got, looking at your schedule, no easy ones on the way out.
No, we got a buzzsaw, so ready to get into it.
Keep firing those shots.
Oh, yeah, I'll do my best.
All right, let's switch to GPUs here, our games, players, and units. Some notable games, players, and units from this past week. Deemer, you want to kick us off?
Absolutely. So, for me, the game that I thought stood out, Rutgers over Hopkins on the road at Homewood. I think Homewood's a historically tough place to play. I think, Big Ten battles are, underway. So Rutgers getting a huge win, I believe, to start conference play with a big 5-0 run in that third quarter. I think it really contributed to an interesting week of the season. And I think could be the start of possibly a tournament rally for Rutgers. They're going to have to obviously, make a big push into Big Ten. So they're 5-5 going into Ohio State. My player, I have Madison Taylor. I was cutting up some clips from Northwestern Maryland. From a points perspective, she was only 2-3, and 5 points, crazy enough, is maybe below her average typically. But I thought she dragged and handled double teams extremely well. She had a 6 skip pass, and she's shooting 64% on the year with a 3-to-1 point to turnover ratio. She's absolutely fantastic. And my unit was Ohio State's midfield, and specifically their dodging. I thought they did a great job against Penn State. We broke down some of their S dodges on YouTube. They had some inverts behind. They attacked well from the high wing. And I thought they did a great job of winning matchups when Penn State was slower to slide. And they really made the defense pay. So that caps off my GPUs for the week.
Awesome. Stephen, you want to go?
Yeah, my game of the week is Dartmouth 9, Penn 8. Sean Kerwin in his second year at the helm for Dartmouth. It's a huge early season Ivy League, or I guess, mid-season Ivy League win for Dartmouth, really putting them on the map. A couple of things that stood out. Dartmouth was only 38% at the faceoff X, but Mason Morrell, their Dartmouth goalie, was 64%. Two other guys that stood out, Emmett Paradine had 3 goals for Dartmouth, and then Alex Jesse had the game winner. He's a freshman from Dartmouth. He's only 5'8" and 150 pounds, but watching back the tape, he's a really solid player. He had some really nice hesitation moves. And if you go and watch back his final overtime goal, does a really good job of just manipulating the defense and getting his hands free. So he really stood out there. My player, Kind of cheating here a little bit, but obviously two guys that really stood out from last weekend. Ryan Goldstein was 2-8 for Cornell. And then obviously on the other side of that, CJ Kirst 9-1 for Cornell. Kirst 9 goals on 13 shots, incredibly impressive. I thought he was going to get to 10. I think it was back in maybe 2014 or so. Jake Ficarro had 10 goals on the Yale field for Princeton. So that's just something that stood out to me there. And then unit, following up with Deemer here, for Rutgers, I wanted to shout out their Fogos and goalies. They had a big win versus Hopkins, and a lot of that was because I think their offense has been lagging a little bit, but this is probably one of their best offensive performances. But the Rutgers Fogos and goalies have been playing really well this season. Matthew Pilato, he is 62% at the faceoff X this season. And then Carden Stoller, he is 60% in goal this season. So I just wanted to shout the two of them out. They've been doing a really good job in keeping Rutgers in a lot of these games. And, then they have a huge win this weekend over Hopkins.
Yeah, and I think just another quick shout out here, just because he would kill me if I didn't, but 10 goals in a game. Nate Lunas of UMBC also has tied that record, 10 goals in 2016. So I think those are the two guys, for Cara and Nate, that have hit the 10 goal marker. And obviously CJ Kirst scoring 6, I believe, in the first quarter and 9 in the game, kind of really approaching that. It's almost funny with Kirst when we do these GPUs. None of us were even about to put Kirst in because I think we all thought somebody else was going to, because it was such an obvious performance of the week. Moving on here. My game is the Ohio State versus Penn State game, Sunday night, Big Ten Network. First of all, very excited that those games are back. It's awesome having college lacrosse on a Sunday night. Ohio State won that game at 13-9. Ohio State started down 4-1, got it tied up at half, and then got it up to 9-5 basically, and kept the lead at a 3-goal margin from there. I think a lot of people probably, have seen that goal on social media. Penn State shot. We saw it on the network broadcast, went over the line, clearly a goal, but we wonder, I know we've spoken a bit, that you wonder if the refs had the same view or not. It seems like maybe they didn't. Not sure, given the outcome of 4-goal win there, that it would have made much of a difference. But Deemer mentioned the Ohio State midfield. I'm going to skip to my unit here over player, just because my unit is the Ohio State defense also. I think you watched them play recently after their Utah game, where they lost 19-13 in the first game of the season. Ohio State's defense in particular, I think, has really come together, giving up 8.1 goals a game, 8th in the country. You kind of take out that Utah game, really kind of helps that, bring it into the 7s. In the goal, Caleb Fyock, Big Tasty, is at 65% this past weekend, but 63% on the year. So number 3 save percentage in the country. And then Penn State only scoring 9 goals. That's the lowest goal total Penn State has scored this year. So I think a very complete game from Ohio State, a team that since that first week has been really kind of getting on track, giving up double digits goals 2 times to Denver and Air Force since then, but really holding opponents to low goal totals. They're scoring on offense. They're able to dodge and create unassisted goals, but they also are patient in their opportunities. And then my player for this week is Aiden O'Neill of Richmond. He was 2-4 in the win over Georgetown. Not the craziest stat line, very solid, but I think a guy on a team that in Richmond that I've been impressed with how they've been competing and getting some big wins. This Georgetown win, I think, is a big one after having a handful of close games. But he's a guy that the offense, in my opinion, really flows through. They have other guys that can score goals as well, but they're setting razor picks for him. He's handling pressure well. He's making good decisions. He moves with and without the ball. So the 2 goals he scored were actually off ball, and he's facilitating, and he's a tough matchup. So he's a guy as a sophomore that I've just been impressed with and had an eye on since the Maryland game in their opener, and a guy I think did a nice job. Honorable mention there on Georgetown, Kevin Miller, a freshman. Although Georgetown lost, Kevin Miller was 4-1 on attack. And so he's a guy that I think just really popped out there and will be a guy to keep an eye on going forward.
Yeah, Kevin's a guy that I remember when he came to some of our first best in class events. He's on the smaller side, really skilled, really high IQ. I think he battled some injuries, late in his high school career. And so, sometimes like when that happens, you just don't know hey, are they ever going to get back to being the player that they were or were recruited to be? And he's definitely been someone that's been consistently showing up in the box score for Coach Hogan's offense. So really good to see out of Landon. And I think otherwise you guys make a lot of great points. And, I was impressed too with Caleb Thiok and Cage. I thought there was a lot of attempts in the second half that he was just cleanly plucking shots, low to low, low to high, high to low. And, just really thwarted any chances of a comeback for Penn State.
Yeah, I thought that game was awesome. I think we've talked about, Big Ten Sunday Night Lacrosse is just the best. I wanted to touch on it because last week we talked about it a little bit. There's been a lot of shifts in the rankings, from this past weekend. And, that was one of the most exciting, if not the most exciting weekend of college lacrosse that we've had at this point. Just with a lot of upsets, obviously, Army falls, Maryland falls. Just looking right now at the top 5 rankings on the Inside the Cross media poll, we have Cornell, Maryland, Ohio State, Princeton, UNC. I think people were definitely high on the Ivy League coming into this year, especially Cornell and Princeton, and the two of them have really backed it up. No one saw Ohio State being here right now. And then I think from the ACC, UNC was the biggest question mark of, are they ever going to come back to what they used to be? So I just think we're at a really interesting point, and, I don't think it's getting any easier, and I don't think the picture is any clearer, I guess, this week as opposed to last week, what the landscape looks like. And as we get into conference play, and, there really is about a month left of the season before, NCAA tournament stuff starts to get decided. So just wanted to highlight that, really exciting time right now for all lacrosse fans.
A lot of these teams are about to hit the toughest portion of their schedule. If it's not all conference play from here on out, it's, probably 80% conference play and maybe 2 or 3 other games sprinkled in. It's interesting because obviously it matters right now how the teams are doing the rank to a degree for the sake of getting into the tournament. But it also, in a much more real sense, once you get in, we've talked about it, it's not about what you've done up to that point. It's about who's hitting their stride at the right time. Curious from your guys' perspectives, if you have them, who do you think, Stephen's kind of just read through the poll, who do you think of those teams are kind of hitting their stride the best right now, or just like performing in a way that impresses you at this point in the season?
I think one for me, I still think Harvard is in that mix. I think they do a lot of things well. Obviously a tough loss last weekend to Princeton, but only by a couple goals, and really assertive win at home against BU, who just came off of a big win against Army. So I look at Harvard and the pieces they have and the coaching staff and think pretty positively about their ability to make a run down the stretch.
Yeah, I don't necessarily know if I have a team that I feel like is hitting their stride, just because I feel like everything is still wide open. I'm even looking at Cornell right now. They're number 1 team in the country. They're playing a tough Penn team this weekend. Penn's not even ranked right now, but that's not a game that you can gloss over in any way. So like that could be, I'm not necessarily calling an upset, but that's something that you never know. And you take a look at Maryland, ranked number 2 right now. This is the team I would highlight right now is Michigan. I'm taking a look at Michigan's, schedule right now, and I think, everyone, including myself, kind of had them written off. But if you go back and take a look at their losses, they lost to UNC, they lost to Duke, they lost to Harvard, and they lost to Notre Dame. Those are all teams that are in that top 10 conversation right now. I think on the flip side, they didn't really, any of their wins weren't like standing out to people. But going back and watching this game this past weekend and seeing the like 20-minute highlights on YouTube from their Maryland win, this is a really good team. I don't think I've seen an offense put this much pressure on a Maryland defense before, just from, being able to beat both long sticks and short sticks. I thought that their game plan was really impressive. I know we had Scott Bita on a webinar, and, he talked a lot about pick play. I was really impressed with where Michigan was setting a lot of their picks. They were on a couple of goals. They were setting them closer into the goal, closer to the center of the field in the box, which was interesting to me. And it seemed like it was messing Maryland up a little bit, was getting them pushed back further, and then was just letting those Michigan guys get a step as opposed to setting those picks really far out. So I know I'm getting into the weeds a little bit here, but, can't see a game like that and not shout out, what Michigan looks like. And they have, what's crazy is they only have 4 regular season games left. They have Hopkins, Penn State, Rutgers, and Ohio State. If they run the table in those games, who knows? Maybe Michigan now emerges as a team that's, going to be a contender. So just interesting to see. And like I said, I think it makes it that much more exciting.
That's kind of been their MO the last few years, right? Is that okay, beginning of the year, and then making the push in the Big Ten tournament, and having some impressive wins there. Another game that's interesting is the Denver-Duke one that was at Highland Park in Dallas. I was there in person, and I think just kind of falls into the category we're talking about, where Duke was 8-1. I think Denver was 4-4. So if you were to look at the polls or you were to look at the records, you would think that it's an easy Duke game, and same with some of these other games on here. But when you look at the teams actually play, well, Duke's been grinding out a lot of those wins and maybe not the prettiest fashion. So I think maybe if you ask the Duke staff, 8-1 might, that's not the way they want to look at it. They want to call out it for what it is in each component of the game that they want to get better at, what they're doing well. And so I think for all of these teams, the name of the game is, 1, winning enough games or making the conference tournament so you have a chance of making the NCAA tournament. And 2, just cleaning everything up. You guys remember in college, probably you finish a game, win or loss, coaches are talking about quality opportunities. Defensively, we might give up 6 goals or 7 goals in a game at Maryland, but we're watching a film on all the quality opportunities we gave up, because on a different week, that's a 13-goal game just because they hit 3 pipes and we asked our goalie to make 3 saves that he should never have made. I think a lot of these teams, maybe if you haven't seen them in person, you don't understand that all of these games, ranked or unranked, are battles at this point in the season for these top, if you want to call it the top 30 teams, if you will. Any of those teams play each other, you better bring your A game. It doesn't matter if you're, the 8-1 team, the 8-2 team, you've got to be ready to actually play and execute. You guys want to dive a little deeper? I know we were talking with Billy Dwan about the 10-man ride, and I'm curious because we've mentioned it before on the podcast, and it just seems like more teams are doing it, or at least riding to some capacity. I think it's a hard thing. We've mentioned before, when you can't see the full field on a broadcast footage, you can't always tell what exactly the ride looks like. I actually saw Duke getting into 10-man a bit against Denver when I was at that game. What are your impressions of the 10-man ride, what you've seen in college lacrosse so far this year?
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, I think it's hard to prep for. I've even just, sometimes heard, with what film angles are available, that it's not easy to get a really good look, at it. I think something that you have to spend time on, to have your players feeling confident, ready to attack. And I just think it promotes a lot of chaos and faster paced play, which I do think benefits some teams and probably has more of an outsized impact on other teams, so I think it just depends on how much you're willing to commit to it. I think it depends on how much your goalie is comfortable playing outside of the cage. Is your goalie athletic enough? Is he comfortable in that space, to leave the cage? Because again, you need to have all players that are part of the ride fully committed to it. And I think that also impacts that, week to week, is every guy prepared, knowing their role, responsibility in the ride to be able to execute and stay in it. And again, even if you get scored on one, it's just percentages, you're not going to be 100% successful always in that ride. So, I think it's something that I want to just continue to dive in on more and learn about, just because, I do think it's hard when we don't get a lot of the game looks, to always see hey, this is exactly what you should do.
One thing that stands out, you're just talking about the chaos of it. And I think, if I think back to one game with 10-man ride really stood out, was that St. Joe's UVA game last year at the first round of the NCAA tournament. St. Joe's was just causing so much havoc. Virginia was having a lot of trouble, and Virginia wasn't settled at all. They kept throwing the ball away, and it looked like it was going to be a major issue. Fast forward to this weekend's game, I got the chance to catch the Syracuse Colgate game, and Colgate's been causing a lot of chaos. One thing that stands out as I think back on it, and I don't know if it was planned or not, but Colgate plays a pretty interesting style of defense. And they let you get hang-ups all the time. And watching the game, it got a little bit boring at times because Spallino was standing back at X. just kind of looking to feed for like 20 to 30 seconds on each possession. But looking back on it, and I don't know if it was purposeful or not, but it really did take kind of the air out of the game and took that chaos out of the game, right? They didn't like feed into what Colgate was trying to get them to do. And obviously Syracuse looks to play fast, but I do think that that's an interesting piece of it. Like if I just think you have a chance to impact all facets of the game kind of at all times. And what I mean by that is, it was almost like the Syracuse offense at times was impacting what the Colgate 10-man ride looked like, right? Because they were just slowing the game down. Instead of having, possession after possession, quick one and outs of like 20 seconds and just an up and down game, which I think Colgate has thrived in. And we've seen that. Just something that, I don't know if it's the answer to it, but something that stood out that I wanted to highlight.
One of the reasons it's topical is we've seen it more, but also there's, I think, an Instagram post, and not that we need to follow everything that happens on Instagram, but that people are talking about like, oh, the 10-man ride doesn't work. It's dumb. It's a waste, because every time you see a post of a 10-man ride, it's usually somebody scoring on it. But the flip side of that is it's a higher risk scenario. So you're going to, like Deemer, you mentioned the percentage trade-offs, like you're going to get scored on it every once in a while. So like, what's your conviction in the 10-man? Like, are you a 10-man team? And if you're a 10-man team, then you're willing to give up a goal or two here and there, understanding that you might get back 3, 4, 5, 6 extra possessions you wouldn't have otherwise. And so, I think if you're going to, if you're clearing against a 10-man, if you're not going to attack that 10-man to try to score out of it, you're kind of playing right into the hands of it. Because if a team 10-mans and you're just trying to clear the ball, well, you're not making them pay for the risk they're taking at all. So when you look at that, like if a team's going to 10-man, you actually like need to try to score or try to break it and put pressure on it. And that's the only way you're ever going to, relieve the pressure of a 10-man. And so I think some of these teams are seeing when they 10-man, some of the teams are just trying to clear against it, and they're not necessarily trying to like counterattack it. And so there's really you're taking away the risk of the 10-man, if that makes sense. Like if you're not going to shoot and score, if you're not going to push it to the attack and try to get quick numbers out of it, well, then that team can 10-man at basically no cost and steal back 1, 2, 3, 4 clears. And we kind of know that the best teams each year clear at 85, 90%. If you make teams clear at 75% against you, well, that's a ton of extra possessions for you to get quality opportunities.
I think that also speaks to, again, just what kind of style you want to play, right? Obviously, if you can break a team a couple times and get them to get back out of it, then you're in the driver's seat. But if a team's coming in trying to really speed a team up and they have the athletes to do it, well, I think that's where, they become the team that ends up really dictating on their terms. If you're choosing whether or not to do it, when you're trying to game plan and strategize, I think you're thinking about your team settled in the box. You're thinking about your team's strengths and weaknesses as a transition team. And if you think that benefits you, then it probably makes more sense to keep, looking and incorporating the 10-man ride. If you like what you have from a more settled perspective, you're probably just wanting to get more of those possessions and trust your defense versus give up unsettled looks, knowing that that's going to be part of the risk reward.
I think my last point on it too, with a 10-man, I think it's smart to include because, say Syracuse is playing Maryland and, Syracuse has a 10-man ride that they've used a couple different times. Well, Maryland has to make sure they're prepping for that throughout the week. So that takes time away from other things. Like you have to prep for a 10-man if there's a chance that the team's going to do it. So that's going to take away time from your other rides and clears, or it's going to take time away from prepping for the offense, right? It's just from like a strategy perspective, from a coaching perspective, it's just another wrinkle that you can throw at someone as, something else that they need to worry about, which I think is definitely effective.
I totally agree. It's almost like the same, not that we have to go into this with a zone, though. If you see something weird from somebody else in like 2 or 3 weeks ago, the staff is kind of sitting there. Are they going to 10-man us? Are they going to zone us? Like we have a practice this week. We got to watch this film. We got to put this in. And then if the game looks different, then what you practice for all week doesn't look like the game. So now you are playing a little bit of mental warfare. And even if you don't 10-man, in my opinion, if a team has any type of pressure ride, to me as a coach, it's just another thing that now needs to be precedent in the scouting report versus, hey, they kind of just drop deep in subs. So if we're like run our normal clear, we'll get the looks. If it's like a 9.5, or they just like, they really chase down and they try to force passes back and forth, and they're, kind of rolling a guy up and doing something a little bit different. It's just something now that we have to spend time on. We have to practice. We have to get our guys acquainted with. It's taking mental capacity from them.
Definitely. I completely agree.
All right, let's look ahead. We got some big games coming up this upcoming weekend. Stephen, do you want to run us through a few of the notable ones?
Yeah. On the men's side, it's a huge weekend. North Carolina versus Army, that's Saturday at noon. I know Army's coming off the 1-goal loss, but this was a huge game that we've had circled and still a top 10 matchup. ACC play, Duke versus Notre Dame Saturday, also at noon. This game's on ESPNU. So we're starting to get our ESPNU games as we get into the end of March and then into April. Big Ten Network, another good game at noon. Wish these all weren't at the same time, but Penn State versus Maryland, that's a huge matchup. And then 2 1 p.m. games that are standing out, Hopkins versus Michigan, and then Syracuse versus Virginia. So a huge slate of men's games. A lot more could happen this weekend. Not sure that there are necessarily favorites in any of these, and really excited to see how it plays out.
Duke Notre Dame game, I feel it's always a big one. Just from a historic standpoint, I mean, Deemer, you played in these games where you guys beat Notre Dame in a championship. I feel like that's always been a battle. It's kind of an interesting point for both of these teams with, once again, we just spoke about Duke. They're 8-2, so great record, but a really tough loss to Denver this past weekend. So huge identity game. And Notre Dame, a few losses that they won back playing Duke here, kind of has a chance to stamp like, where do they stand in the pack this year, from being the most dominant team in college lacrosse last year to now having 2 losses at this point in the season going into conference play.
Yeah, I think these are huge momentum games. I think especially some of these early conference battles or responding back, from last week's conference games, Penn State and Maryland, for example, both coming off losses. So, I think that, again, like Duke Notre Dame is going to be huge for both teams and something that they could really ride into the rest of their ACC play. Same thing with Cuse, Virginia. That game's been a high-scoring, fun affair every week. I think, again, the favorite in that game is Cuse. So, could that be a game that UVA uses to get on track and they keep evolving? And, Lars Tiffany said in an interview this week, they need more production out of their midfield. So can they get guys to step up, there, as they're continuing to grow as a team? So definitely some momentum like games coming up.
One thing that stands out with the Notre Dame Duke game, Notre Dame is coming off of a bye week. They did not play last week. Pretty strategic planning there from Corrigan. Notre Dame only plays 11 regular season games. They've already played 6. So they have quite a gauntlet coming up with their ACC schedule and then Penn. But they looked great the last time out against Michigan. And I think a week off, with the prep work from the perspective of preparing for Duke, but also just, recentering, getting back to what you need to work on. And also just, as you guys know, taking care of your body for that extra week, not playing in a game, that's good scheduling there. And then Duke has that late game. I believe that was on Saturday night. So interested to see, how that one plays out. That's just something that was standing out to me.
You look at a lot of these games, and Penn State at Maryland now, as I look at it, again, is sticking out because those were games last year, very competitive, back and forth, like kind of blowout, and then Maryland beats Penn State. Both of these teams are coming off a loss this past weekend. Maryland to Michigan, a conference loss, Penn State to Ohio State. There's a world where each of these Big Ten games for these teams is going to be a challenge. Like if you look at Michigan and Rutgers are probably supposed to be the 2 bottom teams. Well, both of those teams won their first Big Ten game. So now you have Penn State, Maryland playing. Maryland's already dropped to Michigan. How do you handle your conference play? Do you start off the season 7-0 and then go into the conference 0-1, 0-2, 0-3, knowing that each of these games is going to be a battle? So that's a huge game right there, Maryland and Penn State. Hopkins, Michigan, same deal. Michigan just gets a win over Maryland. Hopkins just lost to Rutgers. So how do these teams start to formulate where they stand in the conference? And that really shakes out the whole second half of the season of where do these guys seed for conference tournaments? How do they, stand within their conference, which is largely going to be how many of these teams get into the NCAA tournament.
On the women's side, UNC Northwestern will have played yesterday. This is coming out and airing on today is Friday. So, interested to see the results of that game. Princeton versus Yale, Syracuse, UVA. I was doing the Inside Lacrosse women's podcast this week as well with the team over there. And there were a ton of games that, we just happened to say, hey, looking forward to this matchup. And a lot of those games are taking place this weekend. A couple other good ones in the Big Ten. And so a lot to look forward to on the women's side as well, as those conference, battles continue to pick up. And, it's exciting. So I think on the women's side, Steve, I'm curious your perspective. Who has a chance to really rival the big three right now in Northwestern, UNC, and Boston College?
Yeah, I think I do think those three teams have just separated themselves, pretty substantially. Even take a look at the Northwestern Maryland game last week. What was it, like 16-4? So I do think they're heads and shoulders above everyone else right now. I think it's hard to say, but, Hopkins is a team right now that does stand out to me. They've had some big wins. Been impressed with Stanford. Syracuse has a young, solid core. And then, just interested to see. I know Michigan dropped an early season game to Yale. I feel like Florida could still be back in there. They made the Final Four last year. So I know I'm saying a lot of different teams. I think there are some challengers. I think the nice part about the women's game now is I don't think it's like 2007, 2008, where it's like those teams are just going to run away with it completely. I think there are some really talented teams still out there. It's just who kicks it into that second gear come April and into tournament play. So we'll see. But those are some of the teams that are also standing out to me right now.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in today for another episode of the First Class Lacrosse Podcast. Make sure you follow along on our socials. Be sure to check out some of our latest uploads on YouTube, including a Billy Dwan D1 defensive workout. Definitely a great segment with Billy. And stay tuned for some of our latest weekly thoughts. And last week's Sunday Coaches Corner, Matt did a great write-up on inside-out defense. So all free. Hope you go out, check out, and subscribe. And guys, great episode today.
All right. See you guys.
Awesome job, guys. See ya.